Hello everybody and welcome to episode 77 of Ask the CEO with Avraham Gatil. Today I'd like to introduce a very special guest. He's a serial entrepreneur, having developed and led numerous ventures ranging from healthcare, software companies, consulting firms, outsourcing operations, and tech-enabled service businesses. He had the opportunity to serve clients ranging from the military, Fortune 500 firms, major health systems, middle market ventures, growth stage firms, and ground zero startups. Within the healthcare space, he is passionate about developing ventures or solutions that improve practitioner engagement and cohesion, extend capabilities and patient access through telemedicine, improve patient experience, and reduce costs through consolidation and automation. He has a 27-year track record of assembling and leading cohesive, synergized teams that collectively accomplish great things. It is my pleasure to welcome Anthony Begando. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure having you. You know, Anthony, I'm so excited to be speaking to you today because I know your company, Professional Credentials Exchange, has come up with an innovative idea on leveraging blockchain for healthcare. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Certainly. Again, thank you again for having me this evening. I have been working in and around the credentialing and practitioner identity space for many, many years, doing, as you mentioned, consulting work, software engineering, outsourced operations. And, this problem or this activity, credentialing, is a process that often takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months from the time an organization says we would like to recruit or contract with a practitioner, all the way through the process of getting that practitioner enrolled with the payer contracts that organization may hold. In general, that 4 to 6 month process, is often impeded by the simple process of gathering and verifying different credential elements that are collected as a in the process of appointing that practitioner to a clinical staff or enrolling that practitioner, in a particular payer contract. Now, just as background, credentialing itself is a very important, process. It intends to make sure that a specific practitioner is clinically appropriate and competent for performing in a very specific clinical setting, right? Whether it's a hospital or an outpatient clinic or a surgery, suite, or at a telemedicine organization. Every organization has their nuanced differences. For example, a surgeon may, work at one hospital that uses a Da Vinci device and a cyberknife and 3 or 4 other robotic, type of instruments, where another surgery suite at another hospital maybe has one of those, instruments available. And what credentialing does is it looks at a particular individual's experience, training, real history in terms of the actual work that's being performed currently and in the past relative to the specific procedures that practitioner would like to perform, within, again, that setting. And, in order to assemble the information that's needed to complete that credentialing work, practitioners often asked to provide scores of different documents, and then the medical staff services personnel at an organization then additionally go and request and consume a whole other batch of credentials information to sort of build this dossier around an individual practitioner, right? Some of the credentialing elements that are required are very easy to obtain. Most licenses, for example, and most board certifications. An OIG query, an MPDB query, all are standard elements, and it takes a few minutes to gather those. However, a lot of the credentialing information that are required, things like employment verifications, employment histories, postgraduate medical education for things like residency and fellowship programs, malpractice insurance information and claims investigations, delineations of privileges and privilege counts or procedure counts for the actual work that the practitioner has done now or is doing now and has done in the past. And those latter things that I've just described are typically the items that take weeks or months to acquire from different healthcare organizations in the marketplace. So what we are doing is building an exchange for organizations to basically present and consume information from other members of the exchange relative to verified credentials, right? So, the number one objective of this exchange is to dramatically reduce the cycle time associated with this independent, redundant collection of information by all parties that must, perform this credentialing process, and create a networked, if you will, database, for example, of information, that's stored at all these different member sites, and create a way for members to not only request credentials, but also consume and offer verified credential information up for other members of the exchange to acquire and consume as well.
Now, can you talk towards some of the reasons why someone would want to speed up the process, for example? Like, what's wrong with the manual process today? I'm sure that, I know there are lots of things.
Well, it's a very good question. Let's look at a very simple use case, and that is a practitioner or physician in this case. A physician wanting to be employed, at a hospital, seeking employment in a hospital, and then the subsequent enrollment of that practitioner in the hospital's payer contracts that they maintain, right? As I mentioned before, it's about a 4 to 6 month long process. And every single day, according to a survey done in 2016 by Merritt Hawkins, every single day that practitioner is not billing in that hospital setting, the hospital is forfeiting about $7,500 of revenue, net revenue, right? So if you look at a 20-day work month, that hospital's forfeiting about $150,000 a month. And if you're looking at this process, it takes 4 to 6 months to execute. You're talking about somewhere between $600,000 and $900,000 of forfeited revenue while all of this paperwork plays out. And our mission, around this whole, process is to greatly reduce that cycle time, right? So if we were able to shave, let's say, even 20 days off of that cycle time, that would result in a $150,000 net revenue plug directly to the bottom line of that organization, right? So there's significant incentive for hospitals, and delivery side, whether telemedicine or outpatient or what have you, organizations, to shorten the cycle time and see that revenue potential come back into the organization, right? For practitioners, we did a quick study in the Nashville market. And in that market, the average practitioner maintains credentials with 3 separate hospitals, maybe 1 or 2 outpatient clinics, maybe a telehealth organization, and 22 different payer contracts, right? So net I think it's about 28 different organizations. The practitioner is basically independently managing and distributing information by and between these organizations to keep their credentials current, right? If those credentials fall out of compliance on the payer side, they're no longer eligible for payment. In most cases, on the delivery side, they're no longer able to deliver care. I mean, it's a disaster, if that happens for the practitioner. And what we're creating for the practitioner is one single place where they can maintain the credentials that all members of the exchange are asking for from that practitioner, and giving them a simple, consolidated way of both, responding to requests for credentials, as well as updating those organizations with changes to their data. For example, a renewed license, a new practice address, an updated training certificate, what have you, and letting those organizations know immediately that these changes have taken place, right? I should also note that credentialing is a perpetual process. So, when a practitioner goes to work in an organization initially, they have to become initially credentialed. But on the delivery side, you have to re-credential that practitioner every 2 years, and on the payer side, every 3 years. So if you can imagine, you have this set of data that you're just constantly sending updates to. And in the current market, and this has always been the case, those organizations rarely communicate with each other, right? So the practitioner themselves is forced to play arbiter in getting this information, pushed around, and we're giving them an opportunity to consolidate all of that work and greatly simplify the administrative burdens that are placed upon them, right, in this regard. On the payer side, many payers, they face the same problem. It takes months to get, a practitioner enrolled within a specific plan. And, they want to make that enrollment process much simpler, right? They want to, in most cases, make it simpler. They want to, simplify the credentialing ask. If that information exists somewhere in the marketplace, gather it for the practitioner or from these organizations and ask the practitioner for the 3 or 4 things maybe that they're specific to their plan that they need, right? Furthermore, payers represent huge, especially national payers, huge data sets of this credentials information, verified credentials information already, right? And they have a significant opportunity to help monetize this massive data set that they have for acquisition by other members of the healthcare market that would like to have access to those, verified data, right? And I also feel that, for some payers, there's, just a burning need for data concurrence, meaning that, if something changes in a practitioner's life, employment, what have you, that they know about that as soon as possible so they can update, different components of their own information like directory data and others. I do want to say, though, for the record, that we are not in the directory data business, but we can certainly help support that maintenance process, that data by providing updates to credentials-oriented information that supports directory data.
Wow. So let me get this straight. You have, for example, a provider. It takes a month to get credential, and he's got to update it every 2 years. And if he misses the fax, or if the payer misses the fax, then you got to start all over again.
Yes. Well, you can fall out of compliance and be no longer eligible for reimbursement in the payer case, right? I'll give you an outstanding example of that. I have a colleague here in Florida who runs a very specific surgical procedure clinic, at a local hospital here. He recently hired a surgeon from Emory University Hospital up in Georgia, and I think he said it took him 14 months to get that person licensed in Florida, credentialed, privileged, and able to actually start seeing patients. And in 2018, I'm sorry, but that is just inexcusable, right?
And then 4 months later, he's got to do it all over again.
Well, 2 years after the appointment, right, has taken place. But yeah, and it's a hugely frictional process in the administrative side of the healthcare business.
So this is fairly significant now. So what are the components of this exchange and why blockchain?
So it's a great question. There are 3 very specific components of this solution. First, we had to address the problem around the data itself. Credentials data is very unstructured. There is no standard definition for most types of credentials. And furthermore, an organization can deem anything a quote-unquote credential, right? So therefore, you have to build a data model that supports this very disparate, structuring of data. And we've addressed that. The second component is analysis of the information. Once you can organize the information in a way where you can structure it as it lies per se, right, and not try to jam it into some sort of structured model per se. Then we can analyze that information. And rather than having an individual sitting at a table with 85 pages of paper and fingering through it, literally looking at it saying, do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this information? Oh, I see something that's conflicting here. Does the data align? Is it, in terms of its concurrence? And if there are problems or questions, do I have the supplemental information here to answer those questions so that our reviewing medical staff members can feel comfortable that we've gone through that process initially to vet out the practitioner's background and information. So the second component of what we've done is create an analytics engine to look at this now, organize data, and at least on the first pass, try and ferret out that information. In my personal experience in the past, it probably takes on average about 70-ish minutes for a skilled, senior level credentialing staff member to go through that whole file analysis and make sure that everything is there and it's compliant and so forth, right? We, in our early testing, we have been able to look at thousands of practitioner files in less than 2 seconds to determine whether or not they're compliant with the rules and the requirements for a specific organization. That demonstrates the power of artificial intelligence and rules engines and so forth, and what they can do from an analysis perspective, right away, right? The third component of what we're doing is blockchain, right? And there's a huge amount of noise, as you all know, in the marketplace around blockchain. But we look at blockchain as being where the web was, the internet was, probably 1995-ish, right? And meaning it's just coming to market, it's just being considered for enterprise applications, and and the runway for the utilization of this technology is long and wide, right? So so we're leveraging blockchain to do one core thing with our exchange, and that is provide trust, right? We're not creating a cryptocurrency, we're not creating an ICO or anything else that you're in all this. We're leveraging blockchain technology to ensure that when an artifact is made available within the exchange, the consumer of that artifact knows the provenance and where that information came from, the fact that the information entered into the exchange and has never changed, it's never been modified, and we also are using it to record and ledger all of the transactions that have taken place with that particular piece of information, so that other parties can know that 38 different organizations have used this data, and it's been verified by X dozens or hundreds, in some cases, organizations in the past, right? And know that what they're looking at is reliable, that it's verified, and can be relied upon in their organization, as well.
So you bring up a good point with regards to trust. Now, with regards to an article posted by Forbes, and I'll read to you what they say, we have an epidemic of health data breaches across the country, and 40% of those breaches come from people who already have access to health records in some form or another, what we call insiders. How do you address the governance of the data inside the blockchain?
That's another great question. So, first of all, I do want to be very clear that the blockchain stores or ledgers, in all accuracy, transactions. Right, the blockchain creates a list of transactions that can never change. Right, we don't store, and nor should most other organizations store data on the blockchain. Right, rather, that data, in a data-intensive application like credentialing, should be stored in a secure repository, and only pointed to. If that makes sense, from the chain. Right. So further, this information, a lot of it's public, but a lot of it's very private and very personal. And practitioners do not want unauthorized folks to have access to this data, right? So we put the practitioner in control of their information. They determine who has access to not only the macro data, but also components of that data, where the practitioner feels that there is an appropriate need for sharing of that information. And using this methodology, we can create a very tight, wrapper around the security of that data and not expose it, in many cases, how these other health systems have been breached, in a place where somebody gets somebody's login credentials and all of a sudden they've got access to this data, right? I think further, we're very much, focused on leveraging Microsoft's Azure platform we have for years in the development of this, and they have a very strong security protocol, and we're very comfortable with what they have to offer in this regard.
So I really love what I hear. So would an accurate use case, for example, be a scenario where practitioners would publish web links, for example, to access their credential information?
No, it works actually the other way. So an organization requests from the practitioner access to their credentials and what information specifically they're requesting, right? And the practitioner then receives this request. We have an application for them to utilize. For example, say on your smartphone, you get a message saying that Mercy Hospital would like to have access to your credentials, and you review the request and you grant that access there and then, right? And again, both at the macro level and in some cases at the micro level, it's regarding certain elements of their files, right? So they are in control, for both, providing access to as well as revoking access if necessary or what have you, going forward, right? Also, I should mention that the practitioners can also specify delegates, which is very important in this industry. Their office manager or their credentialing team leader or what have you, to have access and provide access rights to requesting parties, or provide fulfill information requests. From requesting parties, on the exchange.
That sounds very similar to the process when somebody would grant access to their company Facebook account or Google accounts, for example, where they could set up the administrators.
That's right. But I think Avram, I think it's very important in this specific regard, to help practitioners understand that we care about their privacy and we care about their data, and we're not out selling their data at all, right? Or providing it to others for marketing purposes or what have you. Rather, we're giving them a place to organize this information and distribute it amongst the different parties in the industry that want to have access to it. But we really do put them at the center of this regarding access, to give them the assurances that they need that their data is protected, and that it's secure, and that it's not being used for nefarious purposes.
For sure, and I'm sure that would be one of the first questions people will ask you when they find out about that. So that's a really great point.
Right, and I think it's important to note too that that what is being traded amongst members of the exchange, are not the credentials themselves, rather the verifications of those credentials, right? That someone has gone out and said, this is in fact, what it says it is, and I contacted this organization, and I spoke to this person, and I verified this using this method, and it can be trusted, right? That's the labor and the value that's put into that verification, and then that verification becomes the digital asset that's then being traded on the exchange amongst other counterparties, who might request that, currently and in the future.
That's a great explanation. I like that. So, Anthony, healthcare is a huge market here in the United States and for sure globally. How does a solution like this scale effectively?
No, great question. We would never be successful trying to chisel away at 5,300 hospitals, 975 payers, and tens of thousands of outpatient clinics and so forth, to bring something that created some very, short-term value to the market, right? And, our strategy is very simple. We're going out and working with or recruiting very large managers or very large owners of this data, like national payers, very large health systems, very large outpatient specialty organizations, recruiting contract staffing organizations, who have at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or even millions of credential data sets in the systems that they use today, right? And by doing so, remember I mentioned earlier, we have all this overlap and redundancy everywhere in the marketplace, right? And by bringing, even a handful, let's say 15 or 20 of these large national and super regional organizations to the market, we can create a very significant data set that probably covers over the vast majority of practitioners who are active in the US and the vast majority of the credentials that other organizations would require. So we build this initial network, and then we, as members join, we just simply aggregate that information and membership information, or membership presence, I should say, very quickly. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is we don't need thousands of organizations on the exchange to create a robust set of verified information for others to consume. It's quite the opposite. We need probably, I don't know, mathematically, maybe 20 to 30 total big organizations to probably cover 95-ish% of active, private sector physicians. And
like the 80-20 rule.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, it's that's how we're scaling. And, we will be making some announcements over the next several weeks relative to our initial members. I think you'll find it quite impressive. And, we will be able to leverage their capabilities and their, data sets to create a fairly large scale marketplace, even within our pilots.
I'm looking forward to hearing that. Great. Anthony, what in your opinion are the keys to building a successful application leveraging blockchain technology?
Well, there are three core components to success in this market, right? And it's very difficult to find a solution where all three of these components align, right? The first is your business model, right? Does the business model make sense for a blockchain-oriented solution, or supported solution, I should say, right? If you're trying to create a solution where you have a very closed network of companies or individuals, let's say, blockchain isn't a great fit for that. Private blockchain doesn't really, in my personal opinion, I'm sure there's folks that argue with me about this, but I don't think a private blockchain makes much sense at all, right? If you have a private closed network, you don't need blockchain. You can create a simple ledgering system or transaction processing system to support that just fine, right? So you need something where you have, something like credentialing, where it's a universal process. There is something that already exists that you're using blockchain to help facilitate, right? The next leg of the stool, per se, is the technology model, right? As I mentioned earlier, right, blockchain is not a database. Blockchain is a transactional ledger, right, and a distributed ledger. And if you try and store, or you build a technical solution that assumes you're going to store things on the blockchain that are data intensive, like images, like pervasive in credentialing, right, like large sets of data, Word documents, for example, it'll crush the performance of the chain, right? It's not meant for that kind of stuff, right? The third leg of the stool is the governance model, right? How do you govern, your solution? And in our case, our members of the exchange will govern the exchange, right? They will be, we'll have a governance committee that does rulemaking, that sets policy, and that assists with disputes or conflicts, what have you. And we will facilitate that exchange and the work. But that governance model, how you're going to bring this huge group of organizations together, and find compliance and cohesiveness, must be governed by the folks who have the right incentives, right, and make things work.
Great. So, Anthony, we have a few questions from the audience.
Great.
Our first question is from Ken Herron. He's the Chief Marketing Officer of intelligent IoT messaging company Unified Inbox in Orlando, Florida. Ken says, "Hi, Anthony. If you were to ask 3 smart people what blockchain is, you'd likely get 3, if not more, different answers. As patients are one of healthcare's key stakeholders, how do you suggest blockchain, how it is being used, and why, be explained to patients?"
So, you're right with regard, or Ken's right, I should say, there's all kinds of noise out there around blockchain, right? A lot of buzz and frankly, a lot of misinformation in all candor, right? I describe blockchain from a simplistic perspective as such. It is a method of moving trust to the software, right? It is a way of creating a infrastructure where centralized control and authority of information is no longer required, right? Where you can rely upon getting a piece of information that has been ledgered on a blockchain and know that it's real, or at least trust that it's real, right? As I mentioned before, blockchain is a collection of long-standing technologies, cryptography and encryption and so forth, right? That have been around in some cases since the 80s. But the way that it has been architected, at least in the version 1 of blockchain, which is Bitcoin, I guess, and other cryptocurrencies, to where it's evolving now into much more enterprise-oriented, solutions. I think it's important for patients and others to know that, blockchain is that trust layer. And if you think about it from a software engineering perspective, we sort of have always had, or at least in modern times, we've had, your logical layer, which is your software programs, right? Your data layer, which is the information, and your user experience, which is, the view of that information. Blockchain now is another layer on top of that, which is trust.
I love your explanation because I started my career as a software developer, so you speak my language.
There you go. So do I.
So our next question is from Bennet Bayer. He's the former Global Chief Marketing Officer at Huawei and longtime Microsoft distributor and channel champion in Seattle, Washington. Bennet asks, how do you separate blockchain from the cryptocurrency discussion?
Another great question. I think the best way to describe it is cryptocurrency is a function of blockchain, right? A cryptocurrency uses a blockchain infrastructure to support its exchange, right? And there's also, a lot of noise around cryptocurrency as well. And I think the easiest explanation or simplest explanation is, cryptocurrencies exist because of blockchain, right? And blockchain has facilitated an environment where someone can create a monetary or value-based exchange of value, if that makes any sense, and it's blockchain that's providing the trust amongst counterparties to buy and sell whatever cryptocurrency or other value, based token or what have you, that is being traded, in a market, right? And it is the blockchain layer that's facilitating the trust that lets you and I know, even though we don't know each other, lets you and I be comfortable with the fact that you're going to buy something from me and I'm going to sell something to you, and you're going to get your asset and I'm going to get paid, right? So that's really the fabric behind all these cryptocurrencies.
Great. Anthony, how do people connect with you?
In terms of, reaching out and so forth, I use LinkedIn like crazy. I think it's a fantastic infrastructure for communicating with other business people. So, my LinkedIn profile is, I believe, AD Begando, on the LinkedIn network. And you can look me up directly by just spelling my last name, Begando, Anthony Begando. And, I'm happy to connect and, share ideas and so forth, right? You can also go to our website, which is called procredex.com, PROCREDEX.com, and communicate, with us and converse with us there. A third way of communicating with us is via the hashedhealth.com website. Hashed Health is a joint venture partner with us in ProCredX and a co-founder, of the organization. And at their website, hashedhealth.com, you can go to the blog as well as there's a communication infrastructure there for participating in active, ongoing discussions, with other members of the healthcare community to answer questions like our colleagues asked earlier, as well as inquire about the exchange itself, working with us, and so forth, right? Also, folks are interested in becoming a member of the design partner community. We're certainly looking at other applications for that right now. you can reach out to me either via LinkedIn or any of the methods I described earlier. I'm happy to have a conversation about that process.
Great, and I'll post that information to the show notes so that people can just click on that and get right to you.
Great, that sounds excellent.
Anthony, do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
Don't do startups. No, I'm teasing. No, I think that, I've been in technology for about, it's hard to even say now, for about 30 years. Back into the mid 90s, when PCs were first, kind of coming to market. And in my lifetime, I've seen, 3 real, transformational things that have happened in technology. The first would be the advent of networking PCs back in the late 80s, and the power that created, and the ability to do things like client server computing and all that, when the mainframe and the mini computer, ruled the day for, 2 decades before that, right? The next was the emergence of the internet and web-based applications. And the third is blockchain. And I am, hugely excited about this emergence of this technology. And, I think it's, we're going to see a 5 to 10 year run of this technology really transforming the way that we have used technology, especially software on the internet, in the past. And I think that we're going to see a lot of answers to a lot of the security, data breach kind of problems, and, identity theft and so forth that we're seeing rampantly, running across the internet today, by leveraging blockchain and distributed ledger technology to create a hardened infrastructure where folks can, control their information, frankly, market their information safely, and know that transactions that are occurring on the across internet applications are reliable and secure.
Great. Anthony, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you, Herron. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me.